I buried my wife Martha on Friday afternoon under a grey October sky, the smell of fresh dirt mixing with the scent of her favourite white roses. By Saturday morning, my own son Michael was standing in my kitchen at 7:23 a.m., dressed in his $1,000 suit, like he was heading to a board meeting instead of robbing his grieving father. "Your good life is over, Dad," he said, sliding my credit cards across the counter like he was dealing poker. Time to face reality. He collected my checkbook, my bank statements, even the spare key to my safe deposit box, leaving me standing there with nothing but cold coffee and the sudden understanding that I'd raised a stranger. What Michael didn't know was that Martha's visiting nurse had been watching his every calculated move for months, documenting everything with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd seen this betrayal before. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button. Here's how a 65-year-old retired electrician outsmarted his Harvard-educated son and saved not just his own life but dozens of other families from the same nightmare. But first, let me take you back 6 months, because this story really begins with pancreatic cancer and a son who saw opportunity where he should have seen tragedy. When the doctors first said pancreatic cancer in that sterile room at Columbus General, I watched my wife of 42 years crumble. Martha Henderson, the woman who'd never backed down from a challenge, suddenly looked as fragile as tissue paper. But it wasn't the cancer that broke my heart in the months that followed. It was watching our only child transform from a concerned son into something I barely recognized. Michael started visiting more often after the diagnosis, every Tuesday and Friday like clockwork, always with his briefcase and always with questions. "Dad, have you updated your will recently? What about insurance beneficiaries? Are you sure you understand all these medical bills?" At first I was grateful. My successful son, the corporate lawyer with the downtown office and the 6-figure salary, taking time from his busy schedule to help his aging parents navigate the healthcare system. Martha loved those visits. "He's such a good boy. Robert," she'd whisper from her hospital bed, squeezing my hand with fingers that felt like bird bones. Always thinking ahead, always protecting us. She couldn't see what I was starting to notice, the way Michael's eyes would scan our financial documents a little too intently, how he'd casually ask about account numbers and passwords. The phone calls he'd take in the hallway, speaking in hushed tones about timelines and liquidity. You don't work 43 years as an electrician without learning to spot faulty wiring. And something about Michael's sudden interest in our finances was definitely faulty. The wake-up call came on a Wednesday night in August. I'd gotten up around 2 a.m. to check on Martha, make sure her oxygen levels were stable, when I heard voices from the living room. Michael was there with his wife Sandra, papers spread across the coffee table I'd built with my own hands 30 years ago. "The life insurance alone is worth $300,000, Sandra was saying, her perfectly manicured finger tracing numbers on documents I didn't recognize. Plus the house is worth at least $450,000, the retirement accounts, Dad's pension. We're looking at close to $750,000 total." I pressed myself against the hallway wall, my heart pounding like a teenager eavesdropping on his parents. Michael nodded. "The key is timing. We move fast after Mom passes. Dad will be emotional, vulnerable. He'll sign anything if we frame it as helping him through his grief." My blood turned to ice water. They were discussing Martha's death like a business opportunity, calculating their inheritance while she lay 20 feet away, fighting for every breath. I should have stormed in there, confronted them, thrown them out of my house. Instead, I did something smarter. I became the student instead of the teacher, watching, learning, documenting every move they made. When Michael offered to help with Martha's medical expenses, I let him, but I made copies of everything. When he suggested updating our insurance beneficiaries, I nodded along while secretly keeping the original policies unchanged. When he started talking about power of attorney arrangements, I played the confused old man while researching exactly what those documents really meant. The last month of Martha's life, Michael's visits increased to daily occurrences. He'd bring flowers for his mother and legal documents for me to review. "Just organizing things, Dad," he'd say with that Harvard-trained smile. "Making sure everything's taken care of when—" He never finished that sentence, as if saying the words might make them true faster. Martha died on a Thursday evening, October 15th, 2024, holding my hand and whispering about how proud she was of the family we'd built together. Her last coherent words were about Michael. "Take care of our boy, Robert. He tries so hard to do right by us, even dying. She couldn't see what he'd become. The funeral was everything Martha would have wanted. Beautiful service at St. Mark's Lutheran, the church where we'd been married 42 years earlier. Michael delivered a eulogy that brought tears to every eye in the sanctuary, talking about his mother's strength, her kindness, her unwavering faith in family. If you didn't know better, you'd think he was the perfect son grieving the perfect mother. I knew better. That Friday evening, after the last casserole dish had been returned and the final sympathy card read, I sat in my empty house and made a decision. My son wanted to play games with his grieving father's finances? Fine. But Michael had made one critical error in his calculations. He'd underestimated a man who'd spent 4 decades troubleshooting problems that could kill you if you got them wrong. Saturday morning came like a storm I'd been watching on the horizon. The knock on my door came at exactly 10:30 a.m. Sunday morning, 26 hours after Michael had cleaned out my wallet and walked away with my financial independence. I was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a bowl of cereal I couldn't bring myself to eat, when I heard the gentle tapping. Standing on my front porch was Janet Morrison, Martha's visiting nurse from Comfort Care Services. She was a small woman in her 40s with kind eyes and the sort of practical demeanor you develop from dealing with death and families on a daily basis. What I didn't know then was that Janet had been watching Michael's behavior for months, and she'd brought me something that would change everything. "Mr. Henderson," she said when I opened the door, "I hope you don't mind me stopping by. I wanted to check on you, but I also need to tell you something about your son that you probably need to hear." I invited her in, made coffee with hands that shook more from anger than grief. Janet sat at my kitchen table and opened a manila envelope that was thicker than my last electric bill. "Mr. Henderson, what your son did yesterday. Taking your cards, your checkbook, your financial documents, that's not grief helping, that's financial elder abuse. And I have proof." Janet Morrison wasn't just a visiting nurse, it turned out. She'd been working in elder care for 15 years, had seen this pattern before, and had learned to recognize the signs. When she'd started caring for Martha 6 months earlier, Michael's behavior had raised immediate red flags. "I started paying attention after his 3rd visit," she explained, spreading photocopied documents across my table. "The way he'd ask your wife questions about insurance policies while checking her medications. How he'd steer conversations toward financial topics when she was heavily medicated and confused. That's not normal family concern." The evidence she'd gathered was methodical and damning. Photographs of documents Michael had brought to the house, written notes about conversations she'd overheard, a detailed timeline of his visits and the financial topics he'd discussed each time. "He asked me once if your wife ever mentioned account numbers or passwords when she was on pain medication," Janet said. "That's when I knew this wasn't about helping his parents. That's when I started documenting everything." The most damaging evidence was a business card Janet had found in Michael's briefcase. "Dr. Raymond Hughes, MD, Geriatric Psychiatry." On the back, in Michael's handwriting, "Competency evaluation after M passes. Schedule immediately." "Michael had already planned to have you declared mentally incompetent," Janet explained. "Dr. Hughes has a reputation in the elder care community. He does evaluations that tend to favor adult children who want guardianship over their parents." I stared at the business card, feeling sick. Michael hadn't just planned to steal my money. He'd planned to steal my freedom, my independence, my right to make decisions about my own life. If this Dr. Hughes had declared me incompetent, Michael could have had me placed in a facility against my will, while he liquidated everything Martha and I had built together. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked Janet. "You barely know me." Her expression softened. "Because I watched your wife for 6 months, Mr. Henderson. She talked about you constantly, how proud she was of the life you'd built, how much she trusted you to take care of everything after she was gone. She died believing her son was a good man trying to help his family. That breaks my heart." "But more than emotional betrayal," Janet explained, "what Michael was doing was illegal. Financial elder abuse is a felony in Ohio. What he did yesterday, taking your cards and accounts without permission, that's theft. The forged power of attorney documents I saw him bring to the house, that's fraud." "Forged documents?" My voice came out as a croak. Janet nodded grimly. "The power of attorney papers he had you sign last month? I compared the signature to your real signature on medical consent forms. Someone else signed those papers, probably his wife Sandra. She's got steady handwriting from her real estate career. The scope of the betrayal was staggering. Not only had Michael planned to steal my assets, he'd prepared legal cover by forging the documents that would give him authority to do it. Every signature line, every initial, every date had been calculated to make his theft appear legitimate. "What do I do now?" I asked. "Now we fight back," Janet said. "But smart, with help, documented every step of the way. I know a lawyer who specializes in these cases. Patricia Williams from Williams & Associates. She's helped other families in exactly this situation." That afternoon, Patricia Williams sat in my living room, reviewing Janet's evidence with the focused intensity of a surgeon examining X-rays. She was in her 50s, grey-haired, and carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd won more battles than she'd lost. "Mr. Henderson," Patricia said after studying the documents, "your son committed multiple crimes: financial elder abuse, fraud, forgery, possibly identity theft. With this evidence, prosecution would be straightforward. What are my options?" "We can file criminal charges and let the county prosecutor handle it. Michael could face 2 to 5 years in state prison." Patricia's expression was grim. "Or we can try to recover your assets through civil action and use the threat of criminal charges as leverage to make him cooperate. What would you recommend?" Patricia leaned forward. "Honestly, men like your son usually don't learn from gentle consequences. They see mercy as weakness and legal threats as bluffs to be called, but the choice is yours." "Let's start with getting my money back," I decided. "If he cooperates and makes full restitution, maybe we can avoid criminal charges. But if he fights me, then we file charges and let him explain his actions to a jury," Patricia finished. "I'll start by contacting his law firm. Professional embarrassment is sometimes more effective than legal threats." By Wednesday, Patricia had called Whitfield & Associates, where Michael worked as a corporate attorney. She didn't make accusations or threats, just requested a meeting to discuss a family financial matter involving Michael Henderson. Professional, polite, but serious enough that Michael's senior partner took the call personally. The meeting was scheduled for Friday afternoon. Michael would be walking into that conference room, thinking he was dealing with his confused father and some small-town lawyer who didn't understand the complexities of estate planning. He had no idea he was walking into an evidence room that could destroy his career and send him to prison. Friday afternoon, Michael arrived at Williams & Associates wearing his most expensive suit and carrying his briefcase like armor. He brought Sandra for moral support and walked into that conference room like he owned the building. He walked out 20 minutes later, looking like someone had hit him with a truck. The meeting lasted exactly long enough for Patricia to lay out the evidence and let Michael understand the gravity of his situation. She didn't threaten him, didn't raise her voice, didn't show any emotion at all. She just presented the facts with the precision of an accountant and let Michael draw his own conclusions. "These are the terms," Patricia said, sliding a document across the table. "Full restitution of all assets taken, signed acknowledgement of wrongdoing, agreement to stay away from your father, except for supervised visits, and payment of all legal fees. In exchange, we don't file criminal charges." Michael's face went through several colors as he read. Sandra gripped his arm hard enough to leave marks. "This is extortion," Michael said, but his voice lacked conviction. "No," Patricia replied calmly. "Extortion would be asking for something we're not entitled to. We're offering you a chance to avoid prison. Some people would call that generous." Sandra leaned over and whispered urgently in Michael's ear. I couldn't hear what she said, but I could guess. They couldn't afford a criminal defense lawyer, not with the mortgage on their expensive house and Sandra's shopping habits. "I need time to think about this," Michael said. "You have until Monday at 5 p.m., Patricia replied. "After that, we file charges with the county prosecutor." Michael signed the agreement Monday morning at 9:15 a.m. The restitution process took 2 weeks and revealed the full scope of Michael's planning. It wasn't just the obvious theft, my credit cards, checkbook, and bank statements. He'd systematically positioned himself to control every aspect of my financial life, and unwinding his schemes required forensic accounting that would have impressed the IRS. Patricia's financial investigator, a former bank examiner named David Foster, discovered that Michael had been preparing for months. Joint accounts opened in July with my forged signature. Automatic deposits redirected from my pension to accounts I'd never authorized. Insurance beneficiaries changed without my knowledge. Even a lease agreement for a memory care facility in Dayton, apparently where Michael planned to warehouse me after declaring me incompetent. Your son didn't just plan to steal your money, David explained, showing me a timeline he'd constructed. He planned to erase your independence completely. The facility he'd selected doesn't allow residents to have personal bank accounts or make financial decisions. You would have been completely dependent on his goodwill for every necessity. The most chilling discovery was a folder in Michael's home office labeled Dad's Transition Plan. Inside were printed articles about dementia symptoms, notes about medications that could cause confusion, and a detailed schedule for gradually isolating me from friends and neighbors who might question his version of my mental state. He was going to gaslight you into believing you were losing your mind, Patricia said. Classic psychological manipulation designed to make you doubt your own competency. While we were recovering my assets, I was learning something else. Michael's behavior wasn't unusual. Janet introduced me to Margaret Chen, a social worker who specialized in elder abuse cases, and the stories she told me were heartbreaking and familiar. Adult children stealing from their parents happens more often than people want to admit, Margaret explained. The average victim loses $120,000 before anyone notices. Most cases never get prosecuted because families don't want the embarrassment or because the elderly victim doesn't want to send their child to prison. How many cases like mine do you see? 3 or 4 a year in Franklin County alone, and those are just the ones that get reported. For every family that fights back, probably 10 others just accept the theft as part of dealing with a difficult elderly relative. That's when I realized Michael had counted on my love for him to protect him from consequences. He'd assumed I'd rather be robbed than humiliate him publicly. He'd calculated that family loyalty would trump self-preservation. He'd miscalculated. By the 3rd week of November, all my assets had been returned and secured in accounts that only I could access. Michael had signed documents acknowledging that he'd made errors in judgment regarding financial assistance and agreeing to stay away from me except for supervised visits arranged through Patricia's office. But the legal victory felt hollow. I was financially secure, but I was also completely alone. The house that Martha and I had shared for 30 years felt empty in a way that had nothing to do with her death and everything to do with realizing that my only child had been willing to destroy me for money. That's when Dorothy Castellanos came into my life. I met Dorothy at a grief support group at St. Mark's Lutheran, where I'd been attending since Martha's death. She was 62, a recently widowed teacher whose husband had died of a heart attack 6 months earlier. Dorothy had kind eyes, silver hair she wore in a practical bob, and the sort of steady presence that comes from spending 30 years managing high school classrooms. You look like someone who's carrying more than grief, she said after our 3rd meeting, when we were having coffee in the church fellowship hall. Is it that obvious? Teacher instinct, I can spot someone wrestling with betrayal from across a room. Want to talk about it? So I told her. Not the legal details, but the emotional reality of discovering that your own child sees you as a source of income rather than a human being worth protecting. Dorothy listened without judgment, asked thoughtful questions, and shared her own experience with family members who'd swooped in after her husband's death, offering to help manage her inheritance. The hardest part isn't the money, Dorothy said. Money can be replaced. The hardest part is learning that people you trusted completely were capable of seeing you as prey. Over the weeks that followed, Dorothy and I developed a friendship that gradually became something deeper. We'd meet for coffee after support group meetings, take walks through the park where Martha and I used to feed the ducks, share quiet dinners at the Mexican restaurant Martha had never liked, but I'd always wanted to try. Dorothy understood what Michael's betrayal had cost me in ways that friends and neighbors couldn't. She'd experienced her own version of family opportunism and recognized the specific kind of grief that comes from losing your trust in people you'd loved unconditionally. The question, Dorothy said one evening as we sat on my back porch watching the sunset, is whether you're going to let what Michael did define the rest of your life or whether you're going to use it to build something better. What do you mean? You survived something that destroys a lot of people. You fought back when most people would have accepted the theft. You protected yourself when everyone expected you to protect him. That takes strength most people never have to discover they possess. 3 months after the restitution agreement was signed, I was starting to understand what Dorothy meant. Michael's betrayal had revealed capabilities I'd never known I had. Not just the ability to recognize manipulation and fight back legally, but the ability to build a new life from the foundation of my own self-respect rather than family obligations. I was sleeping better, eating regularly, even laughing again at Dorothy's stories about her former students. The constant anxiety about Michael's visits was gone. The walking on eggshells around his moods and demands had disappeared. For the first time in years, I was living according to my own priorities rather than managing his expectations. But Michael wasn't finished with me yet. The call came on a Tuesday evening in February, just as Dorothy and I were finishing dinner. Michael's voice on the answering machine was different, less confident, more urgent. "Dad, I know I don't have the right to ask for anything, but I need to talk to you. It's about Sandra. She's pregnant and there are complications. The insurance situation is complex. I wouldn't call if it wasn't important. Please." I stared at the answering machine for a long time after the message ended. Dorothy touched my hand gently. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that my son is either genuinely desperate or he's trying a new manipulation strategy. How do you plan to find out which one?" "Very carefully," I said, "with witnesses, documentation, and an exit strategy." The next phase of our story was about to begin. I returned Michael's call the next evening, with Dorothy sitting beside me and Patricia Williams on speakerphone from her office. If Michael was genuinely facing a family crisis, I wanted to help. If this was another manipulation attempt, I wanted witnesses. "Dad, thank God you called back." Michael's voice was strained in a way I'd never heard before. "Sandra's at University Hospital. She's 24 weeks pregnant and there are serious complications. Preeclampsia, possible placenta previa. She might need emergency surgery and our insurance, it's complicated." "What do you mean, complicated?" "I lost my job 3 weeks ago. The admission came out in a rush. Whitfield and Associates terminated me after the situation, with the restitution agreement became known. No other law firm in Columbus will hire me because of the ethics violation. Sandra's insurance through her company isn't comprehensive enough to cover high-risk pregnancy complications." I felt an unexpected twist of sympathy. Whatever Michael had done to me, the woman carrying my grandchild was facing genuine medical danger, and a baby's life hung in the balance. Patricia leaned toward the speaker. "Michael, this is Patricia Williams. If what you're saying is true, have you considered applying for emergency Medicaid or charity care through the hospital? We make too much money to qualify for Medicaid, but not enough to handle the kind of medical bills we're looking at. The doctors are talking about a stay in the NICU that could run over $200,000. "What exactly are you asking for?" I said. "A loan. $50,000 to cover immediate expenses, with a formal promissory note and payment schedule. I know I don't deserve your help after what I did, but Sandra and the baby, they don't deserve to pay for my mistakes." Dorothy squeezed my hand and nodded. Even after everything, the thought of my grandchild suffering because of adult conflicts was unbearable. "I'll need verification," I said. "Medical records, insurance documentation, a meeting with Sandra's doctors. And Patricia handles all the paperwork." "Of course, whatever you need." "Dad, thank you." The next day, Patricia and I met with Sandra's obstetrician, Dr. Rebecca Martinez, at University Hospital. The medical situation was exactly as Michael had described. Sandra was facing a high-risk pregnancy that could require weeks of hospitalization, followed by months of NICU care for a premature baby. The estimated costs could easily reach $300,000, Dr. Martinez explained. Their insurance covers about 60%, but the remaining balance would be substantial. Patricia drew up a formal loan agreement with terms that protected both Michael and me. $50,000 at 3% interest, to be repaid over 5 years, with the option to convert to a gift if Michael demonstrated genuine rehabilitation and maintained a stable relationship with me for 2 consecutive years. The key provision, Patricia explained, is that this loan is for Sandra's medical expenses only. Michael can't access the funds directly. We'll pay medical bills directly to the hospital and doctors. It felt strange writing a check to help the man who'd tried to rob me, but Sandra hadn't betrayed me, and my grandchild certainly hadn't. Whatever relationship Michael and I might rebuild, it would have to start with acknowledging that family responsibilities transcend personal grievances. Sandra gave birth to Emma Elizabeth Henderson on March 15, 2025. She was born at 28 weeks, weighing 2 pounds 14 ounces, and spent 89 days in the NICU before coming home. I visited the hospital twice a week during her stay, not to see Michael, but to hold my granddaughter and support Sandra through the scariest period of her life. "I know what Michael did to you was unforgivable," Sandra said during one of our visits, as we watched Emma sleep in her isolette. "I want you to know I didn't know about the forged documents or the plan to declare you incompetent. I knew he was worried about your finances after Martha died, but I thought he was just trying to help organize things. Did you know about the money he took?" Sandra nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "I knew about that. I should have stopped him. I should have said something. I was scared about our own financial situation, and I convinced myself that you'd want him to have access to help manage things. I was wrong, and I'm sorry." I believed her. Sandra's remorse seemed genuine in a way that Michael still didn't. She was facing the consequences of choices she'd made out of fear rather than greed, and the distinction mattered. Over the months that followed, as Emma grew stronger and came home, I developed a relationship with my granddaughter that was separate from my complicated feelings about her father. Sandra brought Emma to visit every other Sunday, and we'd spend afternoons in Martha's garden, now maintained by Dorothy, who'd moved in with me in April. "She has your eyes," Dorothy observed one Sunday, as Emma gurgled happily in her carrier. "And your stubborn expression when she doesn't get what she wants immediately." Michael remained largely absent from these visits. He'd found work at a small firm in Dayton, handling workers' compensation cases for half his previous salary. He was making his loan payments on time and attending court-ordered anger management classes as part of his probation agreement, but he seemed to understand that rebuilding trust would require years of consistent action, not words. The first real conversation Michael and I had in months came in September, on Emma's 6-month birthday. Sandra had brought the baby for our usual visit, but she seemed distracted and upset. "Is everything all right?" I asked. "Michael's been offered a job in Phoenix," Sandra said. "Better salary, fresh start, he wants to take it. What do you want?" "I don't know. Part of me thinks a clean break might be good for everyone, but Emma's just starting to know you, and I—" She paused, struggling with words. "I don't want her to grow up not knowing her grandfather. You've been more supportive during the pregnancy and her birth than my own parents were." That evening, Michael called and asked if we could meet. Not at my house, not at his office, but at Martha's grave. Neutral ground where we'd both have to reckon with what she would have wanted for our family. We met on a Saturday morning in late September. The cemetery was quiet except for the sound of lawn mowers in the distance and wind through the oak trees. Michael brought flowers, white roses, Martha's favorites, and looked older than his 38 years. "I've been coming here every week since Emma was born," he said, kneeling to place the flowers on Martha's headstone, "trying to figure out how to apologize to Mum for what I became after she died." We stood in silence for several minutes. Then Michael spoke again. "The job in Phoenix is real. Good salary, reputable firm, chance to rebuild my career away from the reputation I've created here. But Sandra's right. Taking it would mean Emma grows up not knowing you, and after everything you've done for us, after everything I've done for you," I couldn't keep the edge out of my voice. "Michael, you tried to steal my life savings and have me declared incompetent. I know what I did, and I know why I did it. Fear, debt, the pressure of trying to maintain a lifestyle we couldn't afford. None of that justifies it, but I'm trying to understand how I became someone who could do that to his own father." Michael turned to face me directly. "I want to stay in Columbus. I want Emma to know her grandfather. I want to figure out how to be the son Mom thought she was raising. But I need to know if you think that's possible, or if I've destroyed something that can't be repaired." I looked at Martha's headstone, thinking about forgiveness and redemption and the difference between the two. Martha had always believed people could change if they wanted to badly enough. The question was whether Michael wanted to change, or whether he just wanted the consequences of his actions to go away. "Staying in Columbus means facing the reputation you've built here," I said. "It means people knowing what you did. It means working harder for less money because you destroyed your own credibility. Are you prepared for that?" "Yes." "It also means proving through actions, not words, that you've changed. Not just being sorry you got caught, but genuinely becoming someone who deserves trust. That takes years. Michael, it takes consistency when no one's watching." "I understand." "Then stay. Build the life you should have been building all along. Be the father Emma deserves and the man your mother believed you could be. but understand that trust has to be earned one decision at a time. We shook hands beside Martha's grave, two damaged men trying to figure out how to be family again, without forgetting the lessons that damage had taught us. It wasn't reconciliation yet, but it was a beginning. The call came at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in November, jolting me awake from the first deep sleep I'd had in weeks. Dorothy stirred beside me as I reached for the bedside phone, and I immediately recognized the tight, controlled panic in Sandra's voice. "Robert, I need your help. Michael's been arrested. They're saying he violated his probation agreement, that he forged documents again. But that's impossible. He's been trying so hard to do everything right." I sat up, suddenly fully awake. "Where is he?" "Franklin County Jail. They arrested him at work yesterday. His boss called me, said the police came with a warrant." "Robert, I don't know what to do. Emma's teething. I haven't slept in 3 days. And now this. I'll be there in an hour." The Franklin County Jail visitor area smelled like industrial disinfectant and desperation. Michael sat across from me in an orange jumpsuit that made him look younger and more vulnerable than the confident lawyer who'd tried to steal my life a year earlier. "Dad, I didn't do this." His voice was steady, but I could see fear in his eyes. "I haven't touched a legal document without Patricia's approval since I signed the probation agreement. Someone's setting me up. Tell me exactly what happened." "Monday morning I'm at work reviewing workers' comp files when 2 detectives show up with an arrest warrant. They say I forged my signature on a power of attorney document for an elderly client that I've been stealing from her account for months." I studied my son's face, looking for the tells I'd learned to recognize during his childhood when he was lying about broken windows or missing homework. But this felt different. The confident manipulation was gone, replaced by genuine confusion and fear. "Who's the client?" "Eleanor Walsh. 83 years old, suffers from dementia. Her daughter hired our firm to handle her affairs, but I've never met the woman, never worked on her case. It's handled by Tom Bradley, the senior partner." That afternoon, Patricia Williams and I met with Michael's court-appointed attorney, a harried public defender named James Murphy, who was handling 47 cases simultaneously. The evidence against Michael appeared strong. Forged documents bearing his signature, bank records showing money transferred from Eleanor Walsh's account to an account linked to Michael's social security number. "The problem is the pattern," Murphy explained. "Your son's already on probation for financial elder abuse. The prosecution is arguing this shows he hasn't reformed, that he's continuing to target vulnerable elderly people. But he says he never worked on this woman's case. That's what makes it so damning. If he was assigned to the case legitimately, his actions might be explained as errors in judgment. But accessing files and forging documents for a client he's never met suggests premeditation and deliberate criminal intent." That evening, Dorothy and I sat in our kitchen trying to make sense of the situation. Either Michael was lying to me again, or someone was framing him for crimes he didn't commit. "What does your gut tell you?" Dorothy asked. "My gut tells me he's telling the truth, but my gut also told me he was a good son right up until the day he tried to rob me. I don't trust my own judgment anymore." "Then let's not rely on your gut. Let's rely on evidence." We spent the next 3 days investigating Eleanor Walsh's case. Patricia's financial investigator, David Foster, discovered some interesting patterns in the bank records. The account where Mrs. Walsh's money had been transferred was indeed linked to Michael's social security number, but it had been opened with a forged driver's license and fake utility bills. "Someone created this account specifically to frame your son," David explained. "The signatures don't match his real signature, and the address listed is for a vacant apartment in Dayton." More disturbing, the power of attorney documents had been created using legal forms and letterhead stolen from Tom Bradley's office. Someone with access to Michael's law firm had orchestrated an elaborate setup designed to make him look guilty. "Who would have access to the office?" I asked. "Current employees, former employees, cleaning staff, anyone with a key or security code." Patricia arranged for a handwriting expert to examine the forged documents. Dr. Sarah Chen, a forensic specialist from Ohio State, confirmed that the signatures on the power of attorney weren't Michael's. "The forger was skilled," Dr. Chen explained. "They had samples of Mr. Henderson's signature to work from, probably copied from legitimate documents in his personnel file. But under magnification you can see the hesitation marks and tremor patterns that indicate forgery." Armed with this evidence, Patricia filed a motion for Michael's release pending further investigation, but Judge Harold Morrison, the same judge who'd overseen Michael's original probation agreement, was skeptical. Mr. Henderson has already demonstrated a pattern of financial elder abuse involving his own father, Judge Morrison said during the hearing. The court finds it entirely plausible that he would target other elderly individuals. Your Honor, Patricia argued, the forensic evidence clearly shows the signatures are forgeries. Moreover, my client had no access to Eleanor Walsh's account information and never worked on her case. The prosecution will have an opportunity to present their evidence at trial. Motion denied. Michael remained in jail while we continued investigating. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Eleanor Walsh's daughter, Margaret, who'd hired Tom Bradley to handle her mother's affairs. I never requested that Michael Henderson work on my mother's case, Margaret told Patricia during a phone interview. In fact, I specifically asked that Tom handle everything personally because of the sensitive nature of Mom's condition. More importantly, Margaret had noticed unusual activity in her mother's account weeks before Michael's arrest. Money was being transferred in small amounts, $500 or $1,000 at a time. When I called to ask about it, Tom said it was for administrative fees and legal costs, but it seemed like a lot for simple account management. That evening, Patricia called an emergency meeting in her office. The conference room felt different this time, not like a place where we'd negotiate restitution, but like a war room where we'd plan a defense against an enemy we were only beginning to understand. I think Tom Bradley is stealing from Eleanor Walsh, Patricia said without preamble. I think he's been doing it for months, and when he realized his client's daughter was getting suspicious, he decided to frame Michael as a scapegoat. Why Michael specifically? Because Michael's already convicted of financial elder abuse. Perfect fall guy. If Bradley plants evidence pointing to Michael, who's going to look deeper? The police see a repeat offender and close the case quickly. David Foster had discovered more troubling patterns. Tom Bradley's law firm was handling 12 elderly clients with dementia or cognitive impairment. In every case, there were irregular transfers and unexplained administrative fees. We're not looking at a simple frame job, David said. We're looking at systematic elder abuse involving multiple victims, with Michael being set up to take the fall for all of it. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. Bradley had been stealing from elderly clients for at least 2 years, using his position as their attorney to make unauthorized transfers appear legitimate. When Margaret Walsh started asking questions, he'd panicked and decided to pin his crimes on the one employee who couldn't credibly claim innocence. How do we prove this? I asked. Very carefully, Patricia said, because if we're right, Tom Bradley isn't just a thief. He's a man who's willing to send an innocent person to prison to cover his own crimes, and desperate people do dangerous things when they're cornered. That night, I called Sandra to update her on our investigation. She was exhausted caring for Emma alone while Michael sat in jail for crimes he might not have committed. I'm scared, Robert, she admitted. Scared that even if we prove he's innocent, the damage to his reputation will be permanent. Scared that Emma will grow up visiting her father in prison. Scared that I married someone who's attracted trouble even when he's trying to do right. Are you thinking about leaving him? I think about it every day. But then I remember how he was during my pregnancy. How scared and supportive he was when Emma was born. The Michael I fell in love with is still there, underneath all the mistakes and fear. I just don't know if that's enough anymore. I understood Sandra's dilemma. Michael had put his family through hell with his original crimes, and now they were suffering again for crimes he might not have committed. Even if we cleared his name, the pattern of crisis and uncertainty was taking its toll. Give us 2 more weeks, I said. If we can't prove his innocence by then, you should probably start thinking about protecting yourself and Emma. And if you can prove it, then we figure out how to rebuild trust one more time. But Sandra, I need you to understand something. Even if Michael is innocent of these specific charges, he's not innocent of what he did to me. Clearing his name doesn't erase his past. I know, but it might give us a foundation to build a future on. 2 weeks to prove my son's innocence and save my granddaughter's family. The clock was running, and Tom Bradley was about to discover that some old men don't give up without a fight. The evidence we needed was locked in Tom Bradley's office, and getting it legally would require a search warrant that might take weeks to obtain. But Dorothy suggested an approach I wouldn't have considered on my own. What if we don't try to prove Michael's innocence directly? she said over breakfast Wednesday morning. What if we prove Tom Bradley's guilt so thoroughly that Michael's innocence becomes obvious? How do we do that? By giving Bradley enough rope to hang himself. Let him think he's succeeded in framing Michael, then watch him get careless. Dorothy's plan was elegant in its simplicity. Instead of defending Michael aggressively, which might make Bradley more cautious, we'd let him believe his frame job was working, while Patricia's investigator gathered evidence of his other crimes. The key is making him feel safe, Dorothy explained. Criminals make their biggest mistakes when they think they've won. Over the next week, David Foster launched a careful investigation into Tom Bradley's other elderly clients. He posed as a concerned family member seeking legal representation for an aging parent, met with Bradley twice, and observed the operation of his law firm firsthand. He's running a sophisticated scam, David reported. He targets elderly clients with dementia or cognitive impairment, gains their trust through professional competence and personal charm, then gradually increases his control over their finances. The thefts are small and irregular, designed to look like legitimate fees and expenses. Bradley's method was particularly insidious. He'd establish genuine attorney-client relationships, provide real legal services to build trust, then slowly expand his access to their accounts. By the time family members noticed irregular transactions, Bradley could claim they were authorized expenses for legal work the clients had requested but couldn't remember. How many victims are we talking about? At least 8 that I can prove, probably more. Total theft appears to exceed $400,000 over 2 years, but the evidence was circumstantial. Pattern analysis and irregular transactions weren't enough to prove intentional theft. We needed documentation, recordings or testimony that would demonstrate Bradley's criminal intent. That's when Margaret Walsh provided the breakthrough we needed. I've been thinking about our conversation, she told Patricia during a follow-up phone call. There's something else about Tom Bradley that bothered me. He was always pushing Mom to sign new documents, always explaining why she needed additional legal protections or account changes. But he never wanted me present during those meetings. Did your mother ever mention what they discussed? Mom has good days and bad days. On her good days, she remembers feeling pressured, like Mr. Bradley was rushing her to sign things she didn't understand. On her bad days, she doesn't remember the meetings at all. Patricia arranged for Margaret and her mother to meet with a geriatric psychiatrist who specialized in evaluating elderly victims of financial abuse. Dr. Rebecca Martinez confirmed that Eleanor Walsh was competent to understand basic financial concepts, but vulnerable to manipulation by authority figures. Your mother clearly remembers feeling pressured to sign documents, Dr. Martinez explained to Margaret. That's consistent with someone taking advantage of her cognitive vulnerabilities rather than providing legitimate legal services. More importantly, Eleanor Walsh had kept copies of documents in a personal safe that Margaret hadn't known existed. When they opened it, they found power of attorney forms, account transfer authorizations, and investment changes, all bearing Eleanor's signature, but none that Margaret had authorized or been informed about. This is our smoking gun, Patricia said, reviewing the documents in her office. These forms give Bradley access to accounts and investments that have nothing to do with the legal work Margaret hired him to perform. The handwriting expert confirmed that Eleanor's signatures on the unauthorized documents showed signs of pressure and confusion, the shaky, hesitant marks of someone being coerced, rather than the firm signatures of someone making informed decisions. Armed with this evidence, Patricia filed a complaint with the Ohio State Bar Association and requested an immediate investigation of Tom Bradley's practice. She also contacted the Franklin County Prosecutor's Office with evidence that Bradley had been systematically defrauding elderly clients for years. We're not just talking about theft anymore, Prosecutor Janet Harrison explained during our meeting. We're talking about a continuing criminal enterprise, racketeering, conspiracy. If the evidence supports it, Bradley could face 15 to 20 years in federal prison. But Bradley wasn't going down without a fight. When news of the investigation broke, he immediately accused Michael of stealing the documents from Eleanor Walsh's safe and planting evidence to frame him. Mr. Henderson has already demonstrated his willingness to target elderly victims, Bradley told the Columbus Dispatch in a statement that made my blood boil. Now he's trying to blame his own crimes on the lawyer who caught him. It's a desperate attempt to avoid responsibility for his actions. The smear campaign was professionally orchestrated. Bradley had contacts in the legal community, relationships with reporters, and the kind of credibility that comes from 20 years of practice. Michael, by contrast, was a convicted criminal whose protestations of innocence sounded exactly like what a guilty man would say. For several days, public opinion tilted against us. The local newspaper ran an editorial questioning whether repeat offender Michael Henderson deserved the benefit of doubt. Two lawyers who'd been willing to provide character references withdrew their support. Even Sandra began to waver. "Maybe we should consider a plea bargain," she said during one of our painful phone conversations. Michael could plead to reduced charges, serve 18 months instead of 5 years. "Emma needs at least one parent who's not in prison. Do you think he's guilty? I think I'm tired of fighting battles we might not win. I think I want some certainty in our lives, even if it means accepting an outcome that's not perfect." I understood Sandra's exhaustion, but I couldn't accept her logic. If Michael was innocent of these charges, a plea bargain would destroy him psychologically, even if it saved him from a longer prison sentence. "Give me 1 more week," I told her. "If I can't break this case open in 7 days, I'll support whatever decision you make." That night, Dorothy found me in the backyard, sitting on the bench where Martha used to shell peas and watch the sunset. "You're thinking about giving up," she said, settling beside me. "I'm thinking about whether fighting for Michael is worth the cost to everyone else. Sandra's exhausted. Emma needs stability. Maybe accepting a plea bargain is the mature, responsible thing to do. And if Michael is innocent? Then an innocent man goes to prison, but his wife and daughter have a chance at normal lives." Dorothy was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "When I was teaching high school, I had a student who was falsely accused of cheating on a final exam. The evidence looked convincing. The other teachers thought he was guilty, and his parents wanted him to accept suspension rather than fight the charges and risk expulsion. What happened? I spent 3 weeks investigating, staying after school, reviewing security footage, interviewing other students. I finally proved that another student had framed him out of jealousy, but the boy who was falsely accused told me something I've never forgotten." "What?" "He said the worst part wasn't being accused of cheating. The worst part was realizing that people who claimed to love him were willing to let him be punished for something he didn't do, rather than fight for his innocence." I felt the truth of that statement in my chest, like a physical pain. Michael had betrayed me, stolen from me, tried to destroy my independence and dignity. But if he was innocent of these charges, abandoning him now would make me complicit in his destruction. "1 more week," I said. "If Tom Bradley isn't in handcuffs by next Friday, I'll accept that we've done everything we could. And if he is in handcuffs, then maybe Michael and I can figure out how to be father and son again, instead of just 2 men who happen to share DNA." Dorothy smiled. "That's the grandfather Emma deserves to have. 7 days to expose a criminal conspiracy and save my son from prison." The irony wasn't lost on me. A year ago, Michael had tried to steal my life. Now I was fighting to save his. Sometimes family is more complicated than justice, but that doesn't make it less important. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Tom Bradley's ex-wife, Elena, who'd been following news coverage of his legal troubles and decided it was time to speak up about what she'd observed during their marriage. Patricia arranged for us to meet Elena at a coffee shop in Grove City, far enough from downtown Columbus that Bradley was unlikely to spot us. Elena was a thin, nervous woman in her 40s who looked like someone who'd spent years walking on eggshells. "I've been watching the news about Tom and your son," she began. "I know things about Tom's business practices that might help prove your son's innocence." Eleanor explained that she'd divorced Bradley 3 years earlier after discovering that he'd been stealing money from elderly clients to fund his gambling addiction. Tom's addicted to poker, not just the Friday night games with friends, but serious gambling. High-stakes tournaments, online games, casino weekends. He was losing $20,000 to $30,000 a month for years. "Why didn't you report it then?" "Because I was scared. Tom made it clear that if I talked, he'd destroy me professionally and financially. I'm a real estate agent. I needed his referrals to survive. And honestly, I didn't have proof. I just knew money was disappearing and Tom always had explanations. But Elena had kept records, bank statements, credit card bills, photographs of documents she'd found in Tom's briefcase, hidden away for 3 years as insurance against the day he might try to blame her for his crimes. The night before I filed for divorce, Tom was drunk and angry about losing $15,000 in a poker tournament. He told me exactly how he was stealing from his elderly clients and why no one would ever catch him. Elena opened a manila folder and spread documents across the coffee shop table. Bank records showing large cash withdrawals from Tom's business account, always on Fridays before weekend trips to riverboat casinos. Credit card bills showing payments to online gambling sites. Most damaging, a handwritten note in Tom's writing that appeared to be a calculation of how much he could steal from each client without triggering suspicion. This note, Patricia said, studying Tom's handwriting, it lists client names and amounts. Eleanor Walsh is on here for $2,500, so are 7 other clients. Tom called it his management fee, Elena explained. He convinced himself that he was just borrowing money temporarily, that he'd pay it back when his luck turned. But his luck never turned. Eleanor's testimony and documents gave us the missing pieces of our case. Tom Bradley hadn't framed Michael out of pure malice. He'd framed him out of desperation. When Margaret Walsh started questioning irregular transactions in her mother's account, Bradley realized his entire scheme was about to collapse. Michael, already convicted of elder abuse, was the perfect scapegoat. Bradley needed someone to take the blame quickly, before investigators could examine all his other clients, Patricia explained. Michael was convenient, vulnerable, and already discredited. We presented Elena's evidence to prosecutor Janet Harrison, along with our analysis of Bradley's financial records and pattern of client abuse. The prosecutor's reaction was immediate and decisive. "This isn't just elder abuse," Harrison said. "This is organized crime, money laundering, conspiracy. We're talking about a criminal enterprise that's been operating for years." Within 48 hours, Franklin County Sheriff's deputies executed search warrants on Tom Bradley's office, home and safety deposit box. They discovered evidence of systematic theft from 14 elderly clients totaling more than $600,000, forged documents bearing Bradley's own signature, and detailed records of his gambling losses. But the most damaging evidence was Bradley's computer, which contained draft documents framing Michael for thefts that Bradley himself had committed. Email conversations with a private investigator about building a case against Michael. Even a practice run of forged signatures showing Bradley perfecting Michael's handwriting before creating the false documents. "Your son isn't just innocent," Prosecutor Harrison told us. "He's been the victim of a sophisticated criminal conspiracy designed to destroy his life." Tom Bradley was arrested Thursday morning at his office while meeting with a new elderly client. The irony was perfect. Caught in the act of recruiting his next victim while trying to frame an innocent man for his previous crimes. Michael was released from jail that afternoon, 2 weeks after his arrest, blinking in the autumn sunlight like someone emerging from a cave. Sandra and Emma were waiting for him in the courthouse parking lot, along with Dorothy and me. "Dad," Michael said when he saw me. His voice broke on the single word. I hugged my son for the first time since Martha's funeral, feeling him shake with exhaustion and relief and something that might have been gratitude. "It's over," I said. "All of it. The charges, the investigation, the doubt. You're free." But freedom, we all learned over the following weeks, was more complicated than legal vindication. Michael's reputation had been destroyed twice in 2 years, first by his own crimes against me, then by false accusations from Tom Bradley. The legal community that had already shunned him saw his latest troubles as confirmation that he was trouble, regardless of his innocence. "No one wants to hire a lawyer who's been arrested twice, even if the second arrest was bogus," Michael explained during dinner at our house the following Sunday. "The perception is that I attract problems, that I'm toxic to professional relationships." What will you do? I've been thinking about that. Maybe it's time to stop trying to rebuild my old life and start building a new one. Something that doesn't depend on other people's approval or trust. Michael had decided to leave law entirely and start a construction company, using skills he'd learned working summers with Martha's brother during college. Not corporate law, not prestigious work, but honest labor that would let him rebuild his reputation through actions rather than words. "I want to show Emma what integrity looks like," he said, watching his daughter sleep in her carrier beside the dinner table. "I want her to grow up knowing her father is someone who fixes things instead of breaking them." 3 months later, Henderson Construction had its first client, me. Dorothy and I had decided to renovate Martha's old sewing room into a nursery for Emma's visits, and I hired Michael to do the work. Watching my son measure windows and plan cabinet installations, I realized that his legal troubles had forced him to confront fundamental questions about who he wanted to be. The Michael who'd tried to steal my life savings had been ambitious, entitled, focused on external validation. This Michael was humbler, more careful, more thoughtful about the long-term consequences of his choices. "You know what the hardest part has been?" Michael said as we painted the nursery walls together one Saturday morning. "Not the jail time or the legal bills or the professional consequences. It's accepting that I did this to myself. Not the false charges, but everything that led to them. If I hadn't stolen from you originally, I wouldn't have been vulnerable to Bradley's frame job." "That's true. Mum always said that our choices create our future, not just our circumstances. I spent a year blaming circumstances. Financial pressure, career stress, fear of failure. But the truth is, I chose to steal from you because I thought I was entitled to something that wasn't mine." I dipped my brush in the soft yellow paint Dorothy had selected. "The question is whether you've learned from those choices or whether you're just sorry you got caught." Michael was quiet for several minutes, carefully painting around a window frame. Then he said, "I think the difference is that I'm not trying to get back to where I was before. I'm trying to become someone better than who I was before." Does that make sense? It made perfect sense. The Michael I'd raised had been accomplished but morally lazy, successful but entitled. The Michael painting this nursery was working to rebuild not just his career, but his character, one honest decision at a time. "Your mother would be proud of who you're becoming," I said. "I hope so. I hope when Emma's old enough to ask about her father's past, I'll have built enough of a present to put it in perspective." Tom Bradley was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison and ordered to make full restitution to his victims. Eleanor Bradley received immunity in exchange for her testimony and started a new life in Tennessee, far from the wreckage of her marriage. But the real victory wasn't legal justice. It was the Sunday evening when Sandra, Michael, Emma, Dorothy and I sat around the dinner table that Martha had chosen 40 years earlier, sharing a meal and planning Emma's first birthday party. Not a perfect family, not an uncomplicated family, but a real family that had learned the difference between forgiveness and trust, between love and enablement, between second chances and endless chances. Michael would spend years rebuilding the trust he'd lost, proving through consistent actions that he'd genuinely changed. But we'd survived his betrayal, fought for his innocence, and discovered that family relationships can be reconstructed if everyone is willing to do the work required. Sometimes, the worst thing that happens to a family becomes the foundation for something stronger than what existed before. Not because the betrayal was good, but because surviving it teaches you which relationships are worth fighting for and which people are worth believing in, even when belief requires courage. 2 years later, I stood in the backyard of our new house, watching Michael teach Emma to walk across the grass toward Dorothy's garden. At 18 months old, my granddaughter was fearless, stumbling forward with the absolute confidence that someone would catch her if she fell. "She's got your determination," Dorothy observed, joining me on the back porch with 2 cups of coffee. "And Michael's stubborn streak," I added, watching Emma pick herself up after tumbling near the tomato plants. "Good thing she also has Sandra's common sense." The house was smaller than the one Martha and I had shared, but it felt more like home than anywhere I'd lived since her death. Dorothy and I had married 6 months earlier in a simple ceremony at St. Mark's Lutheran, with Emma as our flower girl, and Michael serving as my best man. Not the role I'd imagined him playing again, but redemption has its own timeline that doesn't follow plans or expectations. Michael's construction business was thriving in a modest, sustainable way. No corporate headquarters, no employees except himself and 2 subcontractors, but steady work from clients who valued honesty over flash. He'd spent the past year building wheelchair ramps for elderly homeowners, renovating bathrooms for safety, installing handrails and better lighting. Work that mattered to people who needed help, not corporations looking for tax advantages. "I like building things that make people's lives better," he told me recently. "It's the opposite of what I was doing as a lawyer, where I was mostly helping corporations avoid responsibility." The financial restitution had been completed 18 months earlier, every penny repaid with interest. But more importantly, Michael had established a different relationship with money entirely. No expensive suits, no luxury car, no image to maintain. He drove a used pickup truck, lived in a modest apartment, and spent his free time teaching Emma to identify flowers in Dorothy's garden. The funny thing is, Sandra had confided during one of our Sunday dinners, he's happier now than when he was making six figures. Less stress, less pressure, more time with Emma. I think losing everything forced him to figure out what actually mattered. Sandra had returned to work part-time as a pharmaceutical sales representative, but with boundaries she'd never maintained before. No evening client dinners, no weekend conferences, no travel that kept her away from Emma for more than a day. They were living on about a third of their previous income and seemed more content than they'd ever been during their high-earning years. We were spending money to maintain a lifestyle that was supposed to make us happy, Sandra reflected, but we were both miserable, just too busy to notice. My relationship with Michael had evolved into something more honest than what we'd had before his betrayal. Not the unconditional trust of a parent who assumes his child can do no wrong, but the careful respect of two adults who'd learned hard lessons about integrity and accountability. "I don't think I'll ever stop feeling guilty about what I put you through," Michael said during one of our Saturday morning conversations while Emma napped. "Even though things worked out, even though we've rebuilt something good, I know I damaged something that can never be exactly the same." "That's probably healthy," I replied. "Trust that's never been tested is different from trust that's been broken and rebuilt. Stronger in some ways, more cautious in others." "Do you forgive me?" I'd been thinking about that question for 2 years. Forgiveness, I'd learned, wasn't a single decision, but a process that unfolded over time through choices and actions. "I forgive the man you were," I said. "I trust the man you're becoming. But I remember the lessons that transformation cost, and I'll never forget them." Michael nodded. "That's fair. That's more generous than I deserve. It's what your mother would have wanted. She always believed people could change if they were willing to do the work required." 3 months later, Michael surprised us all with an announcement that caught me completely off guard. Henderson Construction had been hired to renovate the assisted living facility where Eleanor Walsh now lived, installing safety features and updating accessibility equipment. "Mrs. Walsh doesn't remember the legal troubles," Michael explained. "Her dementia has progressed to the point where she lives mostly in the present moment. But Margaret, her daughter, specifically requested that we do the work." "Why?" "She said she wanted the renovations done by someone who understood what it meant to protect elderly people instead of taking advantage of them." Margaret Walsh had followed our story through the local news coverage of Tom Bradley's trial and conviction. She'd watched Michael rebuild his life, heard about his construction work for elderly homeowners, and decided to give him an opportunity to demonstrate his redemption in practical terms. "Your son's situation taught me something important," Margaret told Dorothy and me when we visited the facility during the renovation. "It taught me the difference between punishment and justice. Punishment is about making someone pay for what they did wrong. Justice is about creating opportunities for them to do right." The renovation took 6 weeks and included everything from grab bars in bathrooms to better lighting in hallways to secure locks on doors. But the most meaningful part was watching Michael work alongside residents like Eleanor Walsh, treating them with the dignity and respect that Tom Bradley had exploited. "He could have taken advantage of these people the way Bradley did," Margaret observed. "Instead, he's making their lives safer and more comfortable. That's the kind of change that matters." On Emma's 2nd birthday, we gathered at the renovated facility to celebrate with Eleanor and several other residents who'd become attached to our granddaughter during the construction project. Emma tottered between wheelchairs and walkers, collecting hugs and smiles from people who'd been victims of the same kind of elder abuse Michael had originally committed against me. "She has no idea how complicated the history is," Dorothy observed, watching Emma offer a bite of her birthday cake to Eleanor Walsh. "She just sees people who enjoy her company and treats them accordingly." "That's probably the healthiest way to approach it," Sandra said. "Emma will grow up knowing her father made serious mistakes, but also that he worked to correct them. She'll understand that people can change if they're willing to do the work." That evening, after Emma's birthday party was over and the facility residents had been helped to their rooms, Michael and I sat on a bench outside the main entrance, watching the sunset through the oak trees that reminded me of Martha's favorite spot in our old backyard. "Thank you," Michael said quietly. "For what?" "For fighting for me when I was falsely accused, for giving me a chance to rebuild our relationship, for letting Emma know her grandfather, for everything. You've earned it, not through words or promises, but through 2 years of consistent choices that proved you'd changed. I want you to know that I think about what I did to you every day, not in a self-pitying way, but as a reminder of who I never want to be again. The memory of your face that Saturday morning when I took your cards and checkbook. That's my early warning system now. When I'm tempted to take shortcuts or justify questionable choices, I remember how I made my own father look in his own kitchen. I thought about that Saturday morning 2 years earlier, standing in my kitchen while my son stripped away my dignity along with my financial independence. It felt like a lifetime ago, or like something that had happened to different people. The man who did that to me is gone, I said. I buried him along with my anger about what he did. The man sitting here with me now is someone I'm proud to call my son. Michael wiped his eyes and nodded. Mum would have liked seeing us sitting here together. She would have loved watching Emma grow up surrounded by people who protect each other instead of taking advantage of each other. That's the legacy I want to leave her. Not money or property or professional success, but the knowledge that her family keeps its promises and takes care of its own. 3 years after Michael had tried to steal my life, we'd built something better than what we'd lost. Not perfect, not simple, not without complicated history, but real. Family that had been tested by betrayal and strengthened by forgiveness, by accountability, by the hard work of rebuilding trust, one decision at a time. As we drove home from Emma's party that evening, Dorothy reached over and squeezed my hand. "What are you thinking about?" "I'm thinking about how different our lives are from what I expected 3 years ago. Martha was alive then. Michael seemed like a successful son I was proud of, and I thought the hardest part of aging would be dealing with health problems and fixed incomes. Do you miss the simplicity of not knowing the truth?" "No, I miss Martha every day, but I don't miss living with illusions about Michael. The relationship we have now is harder but more honest. Emma will grow up knowing that people make mistakes, but can also make amends. That's a better foundation than pretending families don't have problems." That night, lying in bed in the house Dorothy and I had chosen together, I thought about legacy and redemption, and the difference between forgiveness and trust. Martha would have been proud of the man Michael had become, proud of the family we'd rebuilt from the wreckage of betrayal. My son had buried his mother on Friday and tried to bury me on Saturday. But sometimes the worst betrayals clear the ground for the best foundations. Sometimes losing everything you thought you wanted helps you discover what you actually need. Sometimes the people who hurt you most become the catalysts for the people you're meant to become. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, hit that like and subscribe button. Sometimes the worst betrayals lead to the best transformations, and sometimes the family you lose becomes the foundation for the family you build. In the golden light of an Ohio sunset, surrounded by the people who'd learned to choose love over convenience and truth over comfort, I raised a toast to second chances, to hard-earned forgiveness, and to the beautiful possibility that redemption is always available for those willing to do the work required to earn it. The family that had been broken by greed and betrayal had been rebuilt through honesty and accountability. Not the same family we'd lost, but a better one than we'd ever dared to imagine possible. The call that tested everything we'd rebuilt came on a cold February morning, exactly 3 years after Tom Bradley's arrest. Dorothy was in the kitchen making pancakes for one of Emma's weekend visits when the phone rang at 7:43 a.m., too early for routine conversations and too precisely timed to be coincidental. Sandra's voice was tight with controlled panic. "Robert, Michael's been in an accident. He's at University Hospital and they're saying it's serious." My coffee cup slipped from my hands, ceramic shattering on the kitchen floor like a gunshot. "How serious?" "Head trauma from a fall at a construction site. He's unconscious. They won't tell me anything else over the phone, but they said family should come immediately." The drive to University Hospital felt endless, despite Dorothy's steady presence in the passenger seat. 3 years of carefully rebuilt trust, of gradual healing, of Michael proving daily that he'd changed, and now this. The fragility of redemption hit me like a physical blow, how quickly everything we'd reconstructed could disappear. We found Sandra in the ICU waiting room, holding Emma while trying to manage a conversation with Dr. Patricia Chen, the neurosurgeon who'd been assigned to Michael's case. Emma was unusually quiet, sensing the tension even if she couldn't understand its source. "Mr. Henderson," Dr. Chen explained after we'd arrived, "your son fell from a second-story scaffold at a job site. The impact caused significant brain trauma. We've relieved the pressure surgically, but the next 72 hours will be critical in determining the extent of permanent damage. What kind of permanent damage? Possible cognitive impairment, memory loss, personality changes. In severe cases, patients don't recover consciousness at all. I'm sorry to be blunt, but you need to understand the seriousness of his condition. Emma started crying, a sound that cut through the clinical atmosphere of the hospital waiting room like a blade. Sandra bounced her gently while trying to maintain her composure, but I could see her cracking under the weight of sudden, devastating uncertainty. Can we see him? Immediate family only, and only for a few minutes at a time. He's heavily sedated and may not respond to voices or touch. Michael lay in the ICU bed surrounded by machines that monitored every biological function, his head wrapped in bandages, his face swollen beyond recognition. The confident man who'd been teaching Emma to identify birds in Dorothy's garden was gone, replaced by this vulnerable figure whose survival depended on technology and the unpredictable resilience of the human brain. The doctors say talking to him might help, Sandra whispered, taking his hand carefully to avoid disturbing the IV lines. They say unconscious patients sometimes respond to familiar voices. I stood beside my son's bed, looking at the monitors that displayed his heartbeat, his blood pressure, his oxygen levels, trying to find words that might reach through the darkness of his injury. Michael, it's Dad, you're going to be okay. Emma needs you to fight. Sandra needs you to fight, and I need my son to come back to us. No response. Just the steady beep of monitors and the whisper of machines breathing for him. Over the next 3 days, we maintained a vigil that reminded me painfully of Martha's final weeks. Family members rotating through brief visits, medical updates that offered information without comfort, and the terrible helplessness of watching someone you love fight a battle you can't help them win. Emma was too young to understand why her father wouldn't wake up and play with her, but old enough to sense that something fundamental had changed. She kept asking for Daddy, and becoming confused when we tried to explain that he was sleeping and couldn't wake up right now. How do we explain this to her? Sandra asked during one of our quiet conversations in the hospital cafeteria. How do we tell a 2-year-old that her father might never be the same person again? We don't, Dorothy said gently. We protect her from adult fears and let her experience whatever relationship is possible with whoever Michael becomes. On the 4th day, Michael opened his eyes. Not consciousness exactly, but the first sign that his brain was beginning to function again. Dr. Chen cautioned us that awareness came gradually and unpredictably after traumatic brain injuries. He may not recognize faces immediately, may not remember recent events, may have difficulty speaking or understanding language. Recovery is a process that can take months or years, and we won't know the full extent of his capabilities until the swelling completely subsides. When I entered Michael's room that afternoon, his eyes tracked my movement for the first time since the accident. Not recognition necessarily, but attention. Evidence that someone was still inside the body that had been carrying his life. Michael, it's Dad. Can you hear me? His lips moved slightly, but no sound emerged. His hand twitched when I touched it, possibly voluntary movement, possibly reflex, but something that felt like hope. Over the following weeks, Michael's recovery followed the unpredictable pattern Dr. Chen had warned us about. Some days brought clear progress, recognizing Sandra's voice, squeezing Emma's hand when she visited, attempting to speak words that almost made sense. Other days brought setbacks, confusion, agitation, inability to remember conversations from hours earlier. The person emerging from Michael's injury was recognizable but different, gentler in some ways, more childlike in his emotional responses, slower to process complex information. The sharp analytical mind that had made him a successful lawyer was gone, probably permanently, but the fundamental kindness that his transformation had revealed remained intact. I don't remember everything, he told me during one of his clearer moments 6 weeks after the accident. I remember Emma. I remember working construction. I remember you being angry with me about something, but the details are fuzzy. Do you remember why I was angry? Michael's face scrunched with the effort of concentration. Money? I did something with money that hurt you? You stole from me, tried to have me declared incompetent, nearly destroyed our relationship. He absorbed this information with the careful attention of someone learning about strangers in a history book. That sounds terrible. I'm sorry that happened. The person who did that, was that really me? It was heartbreaking and liberating at the same time. The Michael who had betrayed me was gone as surely as if he'd died in that fall. Erased by brain trauma that had also erased his memory of the crimes and the redemption that had defined our relationship for 3 years. What kind of person am I now? He asked with the directness of someone whose filters had been damaged, along with his analytical capabilities. You're someone who builds things that help people. Someone who loves his daughter and tries to take care of his family. Someone who's working hard to become better than who he was before. That sounds like someone I'd like to be. Michael's physical recovery took months of rehabilitation, relearning basic skills that the rest of us took for granted. Walking without assistance, driving a car, managing personal finances, reading construction plans. But his emotional recovery was more complicated, involving the reconstruction of relationships with people he remembered, but couldn't place in the context of shared experiences. Sandra faced the most difficult adjustment. The husband she'd supported through criminal charges and professional ruin was gone, replaced by someone who was gentler but also more dependent, loving but also sometimes confused about basic aspects of their life together. It's like being married to Michael's younger brother, she confided during one of our conversations. Someone who looks like him and shares his basic values but doesn't remember our history together. Are you planning to stay married to this version of Michael? Some days yes, some days no. I love him, but I married someone who doesn't exist anymore. The question is whether I can build a new relationship with the person he's becoming. Emma's relationship with her father evolved most naturally. At 2 years old, she adapted quickly to his changed capabilities and seemed to enjoy having a father who was more playful and less preoccupied with adult responsibilities. Daddy's fun now, she told Dorothy during one of their garden conversations. He doesn't worry about work when we're playing. 8 months after the accident, Michael returned to construction work on a limited basis, focusing on simple projects that didn't require complex planning or problem-solving. He installed handrails, built wheelchair ramps, and repaired minor structural problems for elderly homeowners who appreciated his patience and gentleness. I like this work, he told me, with the simple satisfaction of someone who'd discovered purpose without ambition. People are happy when I finish, and I can see that I've made their lives better. The man who had once stolen from his father to fund an expensive lifestyle was content with modest work that helped vulnerable people maintain their independence. Brain injury had accomplished what years of legal consequences couldn't, the complete elimination of his capacity for selfishness and manipulation. Do you think he's actually better off now? Dorothy asked one evening as we watched Michael teach Emma to identify different types of leaves in our backyard. Different, simpler, maybe happier, but at the cost of capabilities he'll never recover. And your relationship with him? I thought about that question for a long time. The Michael I'd originally raised was gone. The Michael who'd betrayed me was gone. The Michael who'd worked for 3 years to redeem himself was gone. This Michael was someone new, someone I was meeting for the first time despite sharing 40 years of history. I love who he is now, I said finally, but I mourn who he might have become if the accident hadn't happened. He was learning to be a better man through conscious choice. Now he's a good man because his capacity for being anything else has been taken away. Does the reason for goodness matter if the result is the same? I think it matters for the people who love him. This Michael doesn't remember earning forgiveness or working to rebuild trust. He doesn't understand the significance of second chances because he doesn't remember needing them. 2 years after the accident, Sandra made her decision. She would stay married to Michael, but their relationship would be more like a friendship with shared parenting responsibilities than the romantic partnership they'd originally built. I can't be married to someone who doesn't remember our history together, she explained, but I can be Emma's mother and Michael's friend and someone who helps him navigate the world safely. It was a mature, practical solution that prioritized Emma's stability while acknowledging the reality that brain injury had fundamentally altered the family dynamic. The day Sandra told Michael about her decision, he absorbed the information with the same careful attention he brought to everything that confused him. I'm sorry I can't be the husband you need, he said, with genuine regret. But I'm grateful you'll let me keep being Emma's father. You're a wonderful father, Michael. Different from who you were before, but wonderful in your own way. Will you help me understand what I was like before? I know I hurt people, but I don't remember how or why. I want to understand so I can make sure I never do those things again." Sandra looked at me, and I nodded. Together, we told Michael the complete story of his betrayal, his redemption, and his gradual transformation into someone worthy of trust. He listened with the fascination of someone hearing about a stranger's life, asking questions that demonstrated his inability to connect the narrative to his own identity. "The person who stole from Grandpa Robert," he said to Emma during one of their walks through Dorothy's garden. "That was my body, but it wasn't my heart. My heart belongs to you and Mommy and Grandpa Robert and Grandma Dorothy." Emma nodded seriously, as if this explanation made perfect sense to her. "Will you help me remember to be good?" Michael asked his daughter. "Yes, Daddy, I'll help you remember." And she did. Emma became Michael's moral compass in ways that were touching and heartbreaking, reminding him of commitments he'd made but couldn't recall, encouraging him to keep promises he didn't remember making. The family that emerged from Michael's brain injury was unlike anything we could have planned or expected. Not the redemption story we'd been writing, but something simpler and more fragile, and perhaps more precious because of its fragility. Sometimes healing doesn't look like restoration. Sometimes it looks like acceptance, like building something new from the pieces that remain, rather than trying to reassemble what's been broken. 3 years after burying his mother and trying to bury me, my son had been reborn through an accident that erased his memory but preserved his capacity for love. It wasn't the ending any of us would have chosen, but it was the beginning we'd been given, and we were learning to call it good. 5 years after Michael's accident, I stood in the backyard of the house Dorothy and I had made our home, watching my 7-year-old granddaughter teach her father how to properly water the tomato plants. Emma had grown into a serious, nurturing child who'd taken responsibility for Michael's continued moral development with the dedication of a born teacher. "Remember, Daddy," she said, guiding his hands to hold the watering can properly. "Grandma Dorothy says we water the roots, not the leaves. The roots are what matter." Michael nodded with the careful attention he brought to every lesson, whether it came from his daughter, his ex-wife Sandra, or the occupational therapist who still visited twice a month. His brain injury had left him with the cognitive capacity of someone perhaps 15 years younger, but his emotional growth had continued in ways that surprised everyone who worked with him. "Emma's become his conscience," Sandra observed, joining Dorothy and me on the back porch where we'd been watching the gardening lesson. "She remembers his promises when he can't, holds him accountable in the gentlest possible way." Sandra had indeed divorced Michael 3 years earlier, but remained his closest friend and co-parent. She'd remarried the previous spring to David Morrison, a widowed teacher whose patience with Michael's limitations had won Emma's complete approval. "David's good for both of them," Dorothy said quietly. Emma needed a father figure who could provide consistency, and Michael needed a male friend who didn't expect him to be someone he can't remember being. The relationships that had emerged from the wreckage of our original family were complex but stable. Sandra and David lived 10 minutes away, close enough for daily contact but far enough for independence. Michael lived in a supervised apartment near the medical center where his caregivers could monitor his health and safety. Emma spent weekends with Dorothy and me, weekdays with Sandra and David, and Wednesday evenings with Michael, maintaining connections to all the adults who loved her. "It's not traditional," Sandra had said when people questioned the arrangement, "but it works for us. Emma has 4 adults who prioritize her welfare. Michael has the support he needs to live as independently as possible, and everyone gets the space they need to be healthy." The construction business that Michael had built before his accident had been sold to his former subcontractor, but Michael continued working part-time on simple projects that matched his current capabilities: painting, basic carpentry, garden maintenance for elderly homeowners who valued his gentle manner and reliable schedule. "I may not remember learning to do this work," he'd told his occupational therapist, "but my hands remember. That's good enough." What Michael lacked in analytical thinking, he'd gained in emotional intelligence. The sharp edges that had once made him capable of manipulating people had been smoothed away, leaving someone whose default response to conflict was kindness rather than strategy. "Uncle Michael never gets mad," Emma had explained to David when he'd first started dating Sandra. "Even when I accidentally break things or forget to clean up, he just says, 'Accidents happen,' and helps me fix whatever got broken." The brain injury that had erased Michael's capacity for deception had also eliminated his ability to hold grudges, seek revenge, or prioritize his own interests over other people's needs. It was as if the accident had surgically removed exactly the personality traits that had led to his original crimes against me. Do you ever wonder what he would have become if the accident hadn't happened? Dorothy asked as we watched Michael and Emma plant marigolds along the garden border. Every day, he was learning to be genuinely good through conscious choice and hard work. The accident made him good by removing his capacity to be anything else. Which version do you prefer? I thought about that question for a long time. The Michael who'd been working to redeem himself had possessed agency, self-awareness, the ability to understand why his choices mattered. This Michael was good but innocent, kind but without comprehension of the significance of his kindness. I prefer the Michael who existed, I said finally, not the one who might have been, not the one who used to be, but the one who's planting flowers with his daughter and remembering to water the roots instead of the leaves. That evening, after Sandra and David had picked up Emma, and Michael had returned to his apartment, Dorothy and I sat in our living room, looking through photograph albums that documented our reconstructed family's evolution. Pictures from Emma's 3rd birthday party, celebrated in the hospital rehabilitation center, where Michael was relearning to walk. Christmas morning, when Emma had insisted that Santa bring presents for Daddy's new brain, because his old brain was broken, but his heart was still good. Michael's first day back at construction work, wearing a hard hat and safety harness that protected him from the kind of fall that had changed everything. We've built something remarkable, Dorothy observed. Not what any of us planned, but something that works. Martha would have loved this version of Michael, I said. She always believed that people were fundamentally good underneath their fears and ambitions. The accident stripped away everything that wasn't fundamental, and what remained was exactly what she'd always seen in him. And what about you? Are you at peace with how things turned out? I considered that question while studying a recent photograph of Michael teaching Emma to identify different types of clouds during one of their Wednesday evening walks. His expression was one of absolute concentration and joy, the look of someone whose happiness came from simple pleasures rather than complex achievements. I'm at peace with loving the son I have, instead of mourning the son I lost. The Michael who betrayed me is gone. The Michael who worked so hard to redeem himself is gone. But this Michael, the one who exists now, deserves love for who he is, not who he was or might have been. 3 weeks later, we faced our final test as a reconstructed family. Emma had been assigned a school project about family history and had asked if she could interview Michael about the time before when he'd hurt people, but didn't remember doing it. I want to understand the whole story, she told me with 7-year-old seriousness. Mommy says Daddy used to be different, and that's why you and he had problems. But I can't ask him because he doesn't remember being different. Sandra, David, Dorothy, and I met that evening to discuss how much truth a 7-year-old could handle about her father's criminal past, his transformation, and the accident that had erased his memory of both. She already knows that Michael used to make bad choices that hurt people, Sandra said. She knows that's why we got divorced, why he lives in a different place, why there are rules about his medications and safety equipment. The question is whether she's ready to understand the specific details. We decided to tell Emma the complete story, adapted for her age but fundamentally honest about the betrayal, the redemption, and the accident that had reset everything. She listened with the careful attention she brought to all important conversations, asking clarifying questions but not seeming shocked or upset. "So Daddy was like a bully when I was a baby," she said, when we'd finished explaining. "Something like that," I said. "He was scared about money and made bad choices that hurt Grandpa Robert. But then he learned to be good again. He worked very hard to become someone better. It took years and it was difficult, but he was succeeding. And then he got hurt and forgot about being bad and forgot about learning to be good. But he stayed good anyway." "That's exactly right." Emma was quiet for several minutes, processing information that was probably more complex than anything she'd previously been asked to understand about adult relationships. "I think Daddy's accident was sad but also lucky," she said finally. "Sad because he can't remember learning to be good, but lucky because he can't remember being bad either. So now he just is good, and he doesn't have to work hard at it anymore." The wisdom of 7-year-olds sometimes cuts through complexity that defeats adult analysis. For her school project, Emma wrote a report titled "My Family's Second Chances." that focused not on the betrayal and trauma that had shaped our relationships, but on the love and forgiveness that had rebuilt them. "My daddy made mistakes when I was little," she wrote in her careful second-grade handwriting. "But my grandpa helped him learn to be better, and then daddy got hurt and became good in a different way. Now we all take care of each other, and I think that's what families are supposed to do." Her teacher, Mrs. Patterson, called Sandra that evening to say Emma's presentation had been the most moving family story she'd heard in 20 years of teaching. "Your daughter has remarkable insight into the nature of love and redemption," Mrs. Patterson said. "She clearly understands that families are built through choice and commitment, not just biology." 6 months later, Dorothy and I attended Emma's 8th birthday party at the community center, where Michael volunteered twice a week, helping elderly residents with basic maintenance projects and garden care. Watching him interact with people who were grateful for his gentle assistance, I realized that his post-accident life had found the perfect intersection of his capabilities and the community's needs. "Mr. Henderson is our favorite volunteer," said Margaret Walsh, Eleanor's daughter, who'd become a regular visitor at the center where her mother now lived permanently. "He's patient, reliable, and treats every resident like family. Your granddaughter should be proud of the father she's helped shape." Emma beamed with the satisfaction of someone whose hard work had been recognized and appreciated. That evening, after the party was over and the cleanup was complete, our entire extended family gathered on the back porch of the house Dorothy and I shared, watching the sunset paint the sky the colors Martha had always loved. Michael sat with Emma on his lap, pointing out different bird species as they settled into the trees for the evening. Sandra and David shared the porch swing, comfortable in the friendship that had replaced their marriage, but still connected through their shared commitment to Emma's welfare. Dorothy held my hand as we watched the family we'd rebuilt from the wreckage of betrayal and trauma and accidents that had changed everything we thought we knew about love and forgiveness. "Thank you," Michael said suddenly, his voice carrying across the quiet evening air. "For what?" I asked. "For not giving up on me when I was bad. For not giving up on me when I got hurt and couldn't remember being bad or being good. For helping me learn how to be someone Emma can be proud of." "You've given us more than we've given you," I replied. "You've taught us about second chances, about the difference between justice and mercy, about building families through choice rather than obligation." Emma leaned back against her father's chest, secure in the knowledge that she was surrounded by adults who'd learned to prioritize her welfare over their own comfort or convenience. "Will you tell me more stories about before?" she asked. "About Grandma Martha and when you were young and when Daddy was learning to be good?" "All the stories you want," I promised. "The hard ones and the happy ones, and the ones that teach us about becoming better people than we used to be." As the last light faded from the October sky, I thought about the journey that had brought us to this moment. Michael had buried his mother on Friday and tried to bury me on Saturday, beginning a story that had seemed destined for tragedy. Instead, it had become a story about the possibility of transformation, about the power of accountability and forgiveness, about families that refused to be destroyed by betrayal and chose reconstruction over abandonment. The family that had been shattered by greed had been rebuilt through love. The trust that had been broken by deception had been replaced by something more durable. Acceptance of human frailty, combined with commitment to mutual protection and support. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, hit that like and subscribe button. Sometimes the worst betrayals become the foundation for the best families, and sometimes the people who hurt you most become the catalysts for discovering what love actually means. In the gathering darkness of an Ohio evening, surrounded by the people who'd learned to choose grace over grudges and building over blame, I raised a final toast to Martha's memory, to second chances that became third and fourth chances, and to the beautiful truth that families aren't defined by their failures, but by their willingness to rise from those failures stronger and more compassionate than before. Michael had tried to bury me while I was still alive, but instead of destroying our family, his betrayal had become the foundation for something better than either of us could have imagined. Not because betrayal is good, but because love is stronger than betrayal, because forgiveness is more powerful than revenge, and because some families are worth fighting for, even when fighting requires everything you have. The man who'd tried to steal my legacy had helped me create the only legacy that actually matters, a family built on truth, sustained by grace, and dedicated to protecting each other through whatever storms might come. That's not just poetic justice. That's proof that evil intentions, when met with courage and community and stubborn love, can be transformed into forces for healing that touch not just the people who caused the pain, but everyone brave enough to choose rebuilding over retribution. Sometimes the family you save is your own.